Throughout the histories of Arda, there have been many strongholds that have held against the forces of darkness through the ages, be that for the elves, men, dwarves, or other races trying to hold back the force of the shadow. Many of the greatest and mightiest battles have taken place involving these locations, and today we're going to shed some light on some of the finest citadels erected by the kingdoms of men and their importance during the constant wars against the evils that have plagued Middle-earth since time immemorial. Greetings all, I am your guide, the Archivist. Today we look at the fortresses of men, some of their significance in the histories of Middle-earth and beyond, and their final fates on the fate of the world. Minas Tirith. Minas Tirith, the Tower of God, formerly known as Minas Tirith, was the capital city of Gondor from TA 1640 onward. Minas Tirith features heavily in the histories of the bastions of kingdoms of men, and many of the most important and prominent battles take place in and around the fortress, formerly known as Minas Tirith. The fortress of the Tower of the Sun was built to guard against the men of the White Mountains in the year SA 3320 by the Dunedain of Gondor, those faithful Númenóreans who escaped the destruction of Númenor the years prior. It was at that time named Minas Tirith, meaning Tower of the Sun. It served as the home of Anarion, as Minas Ithil, built to guard against Mordor, became the dwelling place of Isildur. The South Kingdom, however, was jointly ruled from Osgiliath by both brothers under the overlordship of Elendil. In the year SA 3429, Sauron invaded Gondor, capturing Minas Ithil and forcing Isildur to flee. Anarion successfully defended Osgiliath and retook Minas Ithil, driving Sauron back for a time. But in the following War of the Last Alliance, Anarion was slain and the rule of Gondor passed to his descendants, who would continue to rule from Osgiliath. Before departing for the north, Isildur planted the White Tree of Gondor in the court of the fountain in memory of his slain brother. King Ostafer rebuilt the fortress in the city in TA 420, establishing his summer court there. Gradually it eclipsed Osgiliath in importance as the original capital slowly declined into ruin, and in TA 1640, King Tarandor permanently moved the king's house to Minas Tirith. In the year TA 2002, the city of Minas Ithil on the borders of Mordor was captured by the Ringwraiths and renamed Minas Morgul. It was then that Minas Tirith was renamed Minas Tirith, meaning Tower of God. Soon afterwards, the last king of Gondor, Eärnur, was slain in the Morgul Vale, and rulership of Gondor passed to his stewards. It was also around this time that the Ramas Ekor, the Great Wall encircling the rich farmlands and suburbs of the city, was built. The might of Gondor would decline into the late Third Age, and although the White Tower was rebuilt by Ecthelion I in the year TA 2698, the White Tree died in the year TA 2872 with no replacement. After Sauron openly declared himself in the year TA 2951, Ecthelion II strengthened the city's defences. By the time of the War of the Ring, the city was in decline, with many houses uninhabited and the city less than half populated. Minas Tirith was eventually, during the War of the Ring in the year TA 3019, besieged by the armies of Mordor, under the great darkness generated by Sauron's power. The immense battle of Pelennor Fields took place in the fields surrounding the city. Although Gondor and its allies were victorious, Theoden, the king of Rohan, was mortally wounded during this battle by the Witch King of Angmar. At about the same time, the Witch King was destroyed by Éowyn, Lady of Rohan. Aragorn later arrived at the hour of need with an army from the outlands of Gondor, which had been released by defeating the Corsairs of Umbar, turning the tide of battle in favour of the Free Peoples. This is in contrast to the film adaptations where the armies of the dead rampaged through the forces of darkness. After the battle, the Pelennor Fields lay strewn with bodies, Minas Tirith's great gate was broken, and the first circle of the city much damaged by fire. Cair Andros. Cair Andros, or the Isle of Cair Andros, was an island on the river Anduin nearly 40 miles north of Osgiliath. It was a vital import to Gondor during its continued struggle against Mordor, usually preventing the enemy from crossing the river and entering into the lands of men. The island had an appearance that was boat-like in nature, and therefore derived its name from this, along with the way the waves broke along its shoreline, much like the prow of the ship during sailing. The island was around 10 miles in length and narrowed towards its northern end, creating the prow again similar to the variety of boats that was often created in Arda. Cair Andros was one of the main sites used to cross the river Anduin, along with Osgiliath to the south. As the northern parts of the river were nearly impassable marshland, and the south of the river Lillebelin became too wide to ford safely, these two locations were critical to both Gondor and Mordor during the war and became vital choke points to hold during assault. The island was fortified into a makeshift fortress island by Turin II following the loss of Ithilien in TA 2901, and was further strengthened during the rule of Ecthelion II. Cair Andros had a steady garrison, well maintained until the outbreak of the War of the Ring. Military incursions were expected both here and at Osgiliath, but the southern crossing was considered by Denethor II to be of more importance, and therefore was more heavily guarded. Because of its importance being an area of safe traversal between realms, Sauron sent a force to capture this vital location, as it was less well defended than the better known Osgiliath. The fortress was lost for a time during the War of the Ring, but when Aragorn marched on the Black Gate, he sent a force of young men from Lossarnag and Rohan to retake the fortress, liberating it from the Shadow, and continues to be a vital trade port for the forces of good even now. Dale. Dale was first a sovereign township of the Northmen in northeastern Middle-earth that was destroyed by the dragon Smaug in TA 2770. It was then rebuilt after Smaug's defeat and demise in TA 2941, becoming the capital city of a great realm of men with the same name at a later date. Dale was a strong point and busy trade station for the men of the north, sitting beneath the shadow of the lonely mountain nestled in an acute bend of the river Running. In TA 2590 before Smaug, King Thrall re-established the kingdom under the mountain. The realm prospered and Northmen living to the south came up from the river Running and built Dale. Shortly after, they shared a period of prosperity and peace working together for a time. Dale was governed by the Lord of Dale, of whom the last was named Girion. In TA 2770, Smaug descended upon the Dwarf Kingdom. Although they resisted, the terrible power of Smaug overwhelmed the men and dwarves alike, and they were destroyed, their forces scattered. Smaug resided there for nearly 200 years before his eventual demise. The death of Smaug and the Battle of the Five Armies occurred in TA 2941. 3 years after the battle, Dale was rebuilt by Bard the Bowman, who had killed the dragon and was a descendant of Girion. Dale continued to prosper for generations under the leadership of Bard's grandson Brand. However, during the War of the Ring, the shadow of Sauron moved against Dale, and Easterlings crossed the border and moved to attack the city. On March 17th, TA 3019, the Battle of Dale began. Not able to hold back the Easterlings, the Bardlings and their allies, the Dwarves of Erebor, retreated into the Lonely Mountain, but lost King Brand and Dane Ironfoot were both slain at the gates of Erebor. For 7 days, the men and dwarves barricaded themselves into Erebor until news came from the south of the defeat of Sauron. The new kings of Dale and Erebor, Bard II and Thorin III, broke the siege and chased the Easterlings out of Dale. Dol Amroth. Dol Amroth was a feudal principality forming part of the Kingdom of Gondor in the southern reaches of the realm. Flying the banner of the Silver Swan, it was ruled by the Prince of Dol Amroth, the banner flying alongside that of the White Tree throughout the Third Age. The kingdom held the mythical tower within its walls that was called Tirith Ea. In the late First Age, Sindar refugees from Beleriand settled in the area and established an elven settlement about 50 miles north of the promontory at Ateliond. During the Second Age, a Númenórean family of the faithful settled near the elves Elendil, who was their kin, gave them a title to rule the fief of Belfalas. They built their stronghold upon the promontory. Amroth, the king of Lorien from the beginning of the Third Age, left his realm behind in TA 1981 in search of his beloved Nimrodel, who had fled from the horror unleashed by the dwarves in the Moria, along with the numerous Galadrim. He waited for her at Helund for their final voyage together into the west, but Nimrodel, who loved Middle-earth as much as she did Amroth, failed to join him. When the ship was blown prematurely out to sea, he jumped overboard in a futile attempt to reach the shore to search for her and drowned in the bay. When Amroth was lost at sea in TA 1981, the last of these elves left the region. It was from the name of this king that Dol Amroth, the Hill of Amroth, took its name. The first prince of Dol Amroth was Galador, the son of Imrazor. According to legend, Imrazor had married the elven lady Mithralas, a companion of Nimrodel. In the year TA 2746, the 15th prince of Dol Amroth, of which there were now 24 recorded, was slain fighting corsairs of Umbar. And in TA 3019, Imrahil led a small army from Dol Amroth to Minas Tirith to aid in the siege of Gondor, coming to make their mark on the War of the Ring. Dunharrow. The hold of Dunharrow, or more simply Dunharrow, was a fortress on a high cliff top used as a refuge by the Rohirrim. It was hidden in the White Mountains above the Vale of Harrowdale, between the mountains of Ursanga, Starkhorn and Dwimmelberg. Dunharrow was positioned on a flat upland overlooking Harrowdale, the valley of the River Snowbourn. It was located at the feet of the mountain Starkhorn, with the peak Aransaga in the north and the large dark mountain Dwimmelberg in the east. The refuge could be reached by way of a winding path known as the Stairs of the Hold. This path was lined with statues known as the Pukelman, statues originally carved by the men of the White Mountains in the likeness of the Drúdain. The Firianfeld, a large grassy area for the encampment of soldiers, was right above the stair and below the cliff top. Large carved stones marked the entrance to the dim Hold forest, with a road leading to the paths of the dead. The hamlets of Upbourne and Underharrow lay north of here, in the dale. The Hold of Dunharrow had been used as a natural stronghold by the middlemen of the White Mountains during the Second Age several centuries before Rohan, and was scouted by Brago and his son Baldur in the early years of the kingdom. In TA 3019, during the War of the Ring, Aragorn along with Legolas, Gimli and the Grey Company passed through the Hold of Dunharrow on their way to the Paths of the Dead. The legendary moment of history happened shortly after, where Aragorn mustered the armies of the dead to his banner from the film adaptations. After a Nazgul passed over Edoras, Gandalf commanded that the muster of Rohirrim be moved to Dunharrow. Having ridden by mountain paths, Theoden arrived 2 days later and stayed the night before riding to Minas Tirith. The Hornburg. The Hornburg, located at the mouth of the gorge called Helm's Deep, was a great stronghold of Rohan. It housed the guards of the Ford of Isen. As was seen in the film adaptations, the fortress became a place of refuge for the powers of the good during the War of the Ring in the Third Age. Said to have been built during the Second Age by the men of Gondor, it was, along with Agrinost, also known more recently as Isengard, one of 2 strongholds built to guard the fords of Isen. The fortress was turned over to the Rohirrim when the Stewart Cirion handed control of Calanharod to Eorl the Young. The remaining garrison was then deployed to Isengard. The Rohirrim renamed the fortress Suthburg, as it was the southern fortress guarding the Gap of Rohan. The Rohirrim under King Helmhand and many of his people sought refuge at the keep, where they had held out during the long winter of TA 2758 against the men of Dunland. After this heroic siege, the fortress was renamed Hornburg in honour of Helm. During the War of the Ring, the fortress again became the refuge of some of the Rohirrim, now under King Theoden, and the Battle of the Hornburg was fought there against Saruman's army. It was during the Battle of the Deeping Wall. It was during this battle that the Deeping Wall was destroyed by explosives. Despite this, Saruman's forces were driven back and routed with the arrival of Erkenbrand on the morning of March 4th, 3019, whilst in the film adaptations, it's Gandalf and the Rohirrim with Eomer that break the siege. Henneth Annun. Henneth Annun, also called the Window of the Sunset or the Window of the West, was a hidden refuge of the Rangers of Ithilien in the northern part of Ithilien along the Ethelduath, the Mountains of Shadow. The waterfall cascading over the cliff face had originally run through the cave itself, but was altered to flow over one of the entrances, This likeness to a window gave Henneth Annun its name. There are two entrances into the cave system, one being the route through which Samwise Gamgee and Frodo Baggins were led, and the other being the window itself. At the bottom of the window was a bowl full of sharp stone knives, the Forbidden Pool. Like the other hidden refuges of Gondor in Ithilien, Henneth Annun was created by the steward Turin II in TA 2901 in response to incursions of orcs from Mordor. Henneth Annun was the longest standing of the refuges in Ithilien, and during the War of the Ring, Faramir, son of the stewards of Gondor Denethor II, made it his base of operations. Caught in Ithilien, Frodo Baggins and Samwise Gamgee were taken there to be questioned by Faramir. Requiring the utmost security, the ring-bearer and his servant were blindfolded until arrival at the refuge. Gollum found the Forbidden Pool quite by accident while he was diving for fish. The penalty for coming to Henneth Annun without permission was death. However, Frodo convinced Faramir to spare Gollum, and he was also taken to the cave blindfolded. The refuge's garrison departed just after the ring-bearer, and was used to reinforce the western half of Osgiliath against the forces of Minas Morgul. Osgiliath. Osgiliath was the first capital of Gondor. During the War of the Ring, the abandoned city gained strategic importance as a crossing point over the Anduin both for the men of Gondor and the orcs of Mordor. At the heart of Osgiliath was a great stone bridge over the river. On the bridge was a tower containing the famous Dome of Stars, which housed the city's Palantir. The city was founded by Isildur and Anarion near the end of the Second Age, built on either side of the Anduin River. Ruling Gondor jointly, Osgiliath was their joint capital. During the War of the Last Alliance, the city was attacked by Sauron's forces but successfully defended by Anarion. At the height of Gondor's power, the city was a reflection of the splendour of Numenor's cities, but this was not to last. Decline started with the kin strife when Osgiliath was sacked and burned by the forces of Castamir the Usurper in TA 1437, and the city's Palantir was lost in the Anduin. The decline of the city was greatly accelerated by the Great Plague of TA 1636, and Osgiliath began falling into ruin, with King Tarandor moving the capital to Minas Anor in TA 1640. The final blow came in TA 2475 when the Uruks of Mordor overran and captured Osgiliath. Though they were thrown back by Boromir, son of the then steward Denethor I, Osgiliath was finally ruined and completely abandoned, and its great bridge was broken. Osgiliath was one of the few places between Rauros and the sea where large armies could cross the Anduin without needing many boats. Thus, a key part of Gondor's defensive strategy after the loss of East Osgiliath was to hold West Osgiliath and oppose any attempt at crossing the river. It was while on guard in West Osgiliath in February 3019 that Faramir saw Boromir's funeral boat. But when the Witch King and his army attacked Gondor in March 3019, it was revealed that Sauron's forces had secretly built many floats and barges in East Osgiliath. Though they met the determined opposition from Faramir and Osgiliath's garrison, they were able to cross with fewer casualties than the defenders had hoped, and Faramir ordered a general retreat to the Ramas Ekor. When he led the bulk of his army to besiege Minas Tirith, the Witch King left some reserves in Osgiliath. Gothmog later deployed these forces against Mordor. Gothmog later deployed these forces against Gondor and its allies in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. Pelargir. The great port of Gondor, Pelargir, was one of the earliest settlements of the Númenóreans founded in Middle-earth during the Second Age. It was located above the delta of the Anduin and the south of the White Mountains. Pelargir was built in SA 2350. During the years of Númenor's moral decline, it became the chief haven of the faithful as they migrated to escape the persecution they faced from the king's men. When Númenor fell, the force of the storm changed the coastline, and where Pelargir had been fairly close to the sea, from then on it was almost 50 miles upstream. The city subsequently became the principal port of the new founding kingdom of Gondor. As Gondor's power grew under the four-ship kings, Pelargir became the home of its navy. Turan and Falastur built their palace in the city, suspended on arches above the river. However, during the civil war of the kin strife, the city was besieged by Eldacar, as it had become a stronghold of the sons and supporters of Castamir the Usurper. The siege was partially a success, but they escaped by ship and set themselves up in Umbar. Their heirs became known as the Corsairs of Umbar. With the decline of Gondor's power, Pelargir was attacked many times by the Corsairs, who were in secret allegiance with Sauron, but the forces of Gondor managed to defend the coasts. In TA 1634, however, the Corsairs sacked the city, slaying King Menardil. Prior to the War of the Ring, the city's defences were strengthened by Ecthelion II, and during the war the struggle with the Corsairs came to a head when a great Corsair fleet captured the city. As Gondor's army was tied up in Minas Tirith, there were few troops to defend the Pelargir on the coasts. Then Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli, along with the Grey Company and the Army of the Dead, arrived and defeated the Corsairs. The heroes used the black ships to reach Minas Tirith and defeat Sauron's forces. And so I have now covered the content for this video, but if there's anything that has been missed, please share them in the comments down below. If you have enjoyed this content, please remember to like the subscribe and like Wastedowns down below. Now Louis Vanadvan. Until we meet again.